Hey everyone, fair warning, this video contains spoilers for the entire Malazan Book of the Fallen. This is an analysis on one particular character of the series. And that being said, after the spoilers barrier has been passed, fair warning, this video is about Tavore Paran, the one that I judge to be the most transcendental, like the title says, character in the series. Now, it seems like big words to describe a fantasy character. So what do I mean by transcendental? Well, I mean that in the sense of metacriticism of the fantasy genre, perhaps also science fiction. It depends, but certainly not in terms of literary fiction. We focus on what we will call genre fiction in general. So it's an analysis that comes from meta criticism of genre fiction. What do I mean? It's not a sophisticated concept. By meta criticism, I mean that we don't look just at independent novels or series. We do a more broad analysis of how different novels or series connect to each other to form a tradition or a genre or subgenre in general. So in the case of fantasy, I like to pin things down to Tolkien, so I will be using many examples of the Tolkien paradigm of fiction, of fantasy, of epic fantasy in particular. And the point is that in general there is a lot of connection between one work and another. There is a cross influence, even if authors hate, many of them hate acknowledging that they have been influenced by one another. But when one analyzes the structure and the strategies used by different authors, you can find some structures, some patterns that are somewhat widespread throughout a genre. In fantasy in particular, in classical fantasy, we have a very specific structure where a hero or a group of heroes are set on a quest to vanquish evil. In the case of the Lord of the Rings, of course, this hero is Frodo. He has to defeat the evil that is the ring. The big bad guy is Sauron. And he's on a quest to do this. He has other characters that help him, but it's mostly his quest. Now, the interesting point that will allow me to make this, to present my idea here, is the way in which authors since Tolkien have explored the perception of the hero, of the main character that is doing this important quest, that is pushing this important quest more than the rest. Traditionally, in terms of structure and narrative strategy, we have an insight into what this hero, this character is thinking almost all the time. We see his actions, his rationale, what he thinks or what she thinks, but in the case of Frodo, he. And we always more or less know where is he coming from, what he thinks, what he feels. And even when we don't see him directly, we see people that are empathetic to him, people that he has known for many years, or people that generally trust him. So when one analyzes the point of view element of the story, of the narrative, one thinks, well, if you truly think of it critically, you wonder yourself, well, is this account of what happened, in fictional terms, is this account unbiased? Is it reasonable, or is it filtered through points of view that are sympathetic with this hero, with this character? And after thinking about this, I'm sure that one comes up with a mind experiment, with a thought experiment, if I should say. And it's this. If we take the traditional fantasy hero and we are not allowed to look into his or her thoughts and feelings, and moreover, we don't see them directly from characters that know them or trust them or know what they feel. If we see them through characters that, just like us, are just meeting them and that may or may not have reasons to distrust them, to doubt them, and through all the entire quest to vanquish evil, this character is constantly on this dubious light, on this uncertain light, described by people that don't know them, and we never get to see inside of this character. The central point of the thought experiment is, would we be able to recognize the hero of the story given these circumstances? In other words, if the hero, if we saw Frodo not from the eyes of Sam and Aragorn and Gandalf, people that more or less know him or trust him, and we didn't know what he's thinking and feeling, will we recognize him as a hero? Will we doubt him? Will we have second guesses about them? What makes a hero? Is it something about perception, about the point of view, or is there something more fundamental in what makes a fantasy hero, or honestly, a hero in general, in any kind of narrative in which that term can be used? So that's a theoretical approach. It's a thought experiment. I'm sure that many fans of the narrative art and trade have posed themselves this question. What happens when you play with the point of view around this heroic figure? Now, why do I think Tavore is the most transcendental character? Is because I think Tavore is an actual exploration of this thought experiment. It's the execution of a hypothesis, of an idea fleshed out. Think about it. In book one, we are introduced to Tavore in a very bad light. Janos doesn't seem to have a very good opinion of her. Then in Dead House Gates, we know she has been forced to do this horrible thing with the calling of the nobility and doing what she did to her sister. Then it jumps to House of Chains. She doesn't seem particularly trustworthy. We don't know anything about her. We might guess that she's trying to do the right thing, but it's not clear. Even after she gains some trust in us, in Bone Hunters, there's still some kind of doubt. Yes, she seemed to be guiding what we might think are the good people in the series, the Bone Hunters, the protagonists, so to speak. She's leading them. She seems to be the good character. There's always some kind of doubt due to the fact that we don't really know what she's up to. The people around her don't know her motivations or her emotional state. So even though through the series goes on, we build some kind of trust and empathy towards her, it's really underscored, is always accompanied by this doubt. When we reach Dust of Dreams, it becomes more complicated because it becomes apparent that she's fully on a mission to accomplish something, and we don't know her allegiance. and we still don't know her mind. By then we know that many of her soldiers trust her a lot and want her to succeed, but the mission isn't very clear. And this is where this experiment gets to fruition just after the Dust of Dream in the Crippled God. Almost nobody that I know could have guessed that Tavore would end up being the great hero of the story, and that the story will revolve so strongly around her. So, by that point, by the end of the Crippled God, it becomes evident that, using a very Tolkien-like analogy, if Malazan was the Lord of the Rings, Tavore was Frodo. Shadow Throne was probably Gandalf. And the ring was probably the shining of the Crippled God. This is one of the aspects of the series that surprised me the most. I had doubts about Tavore until the very end. This is something that Erickson wrote very smart about in the Dust of Dreams and the first part of the Crippled God. He wrote things ambiguously on purpose. Well, when she summons the river in the middle of the glass desert using the dagger that, at that point, I didn't remember that it was given to her by Mile. The phrase, "Haven't you drunk enough?" I thought that by that point she had gone insane, and she was telling that to the bone hunters who were dying of thirst. This is a classical example of the retroactive interpretation of comments throughout the series. Only after I realized what she was up to could I come back here and realize, oh, she's not saying, "Haven't you drunk enough?" to the bone hunters. She's telling that to the elder gods, one of which Mile is Mile is at least one of the strongest of them. And what marks the hegemony of the elder gods, blood sacrifice. So when she says, "Haven't you drunk enough?" it's the same discourse that we have been hearing from Amanas and many others. Blood sacrifice, the elder gods draining, leeching of mortals. Janos too has used this terminology. So the "haven't you drunk enough" was a comment to Mile and the elder gods. Haven't you drunk enough blood? Haven't you exploited the humans, the mortals in general, not just humans enough? And the series is full of this kind of hints that are ambiguous on purpose. It's easy to misrepresent them and take them as Tavore having a betrayal plan. And it is only at the very end that we realize that, well, yes, Tavore, the person we met in Gardens of the Moon with that very bad introduction, with this friction with Janos, with whom we have some kind of empathy because he was the kid in the prologue. This very person, on this very bad light, ends up being the hero of the story, the person that carried the great mission to vanquish evil, in this case not by killing or destroying anything, but by breaking someone free, which is a very smart offsetting of the traditional fantasy tropes, in my opinion. So what I think is that this kind of experiment with the point of view and the question of what is a hero, what makes the traditional fantasy hero be such a character, and will we be able to distinguish them given ambiguous or unreliable narration and points of view, unfavorable presentation. I think this kind of experiment has a lot more potential. And that's what I mean by transcendental. I hope that this kind of experiment will eventually influence more people to test this kind of premise in different settings and to explore different aspects of the traditional, let's say, exploration of fantasy elements, and why not the science fiction too. I hope that this character will eventually be analyzed and that it influences some of the new writers that are coming up to the fantasy genre and use something similar to explore some other aspects that may or may not be related to the hero, but that are part of the canon, of the traditional canon of fantasy. The argument is not whether she's not your favorite character. It's not if she's the most important. I don't believe it really has a meaning in such an epic, enormous series. But it's about the intellectual exercise of wondering if the point of view is unreliable and and if the facts are actually ambiguous given the context, will we still recognize the traditional fantasy hero? And if so, what makes the fantasy hero to be such? Is it just the way in which they are presented? Or is there an intrinsic characteristics to them that will allow us to look through regardless of the bad presentation and recognize them as the hero? So basically that's my thesis for the time being, and well, that's it. I hope I get some replies and we can argue about this. I'm sure I've already discussed this before. I'm sure that some people disagree, that they wouldn't frame Malazan as being about her, but that's a topic for another video. I guess I'll discuss the main theories of how you can interpret Malazan in a unified way. Just a heads up, I believe Malazan is essentially a fictional history, not story, but history with a metafictional element. And in this context, the Malazan Book of the Fallen is about the historical event of setting the crippled god free. And all the rest is just the build up and the fleshing out of this historical act. Who pushes this act? It's Tavore. So the most fundamental simplification of the story is essentially, yes, she's the protagonist, and that's the great evil, the injustice that was committed with Camisot. So I hope to see you all soon and have a good one. Bye.